It's not the screams of the dead that haunt Whispering Gulch. It's the terrible absolute absence of sorrow, a silence so profound it tastes like ash in your mouth. Nestled deep within a perpetually mist-shrouded hollow in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia lies the forgotten scar of Whispering Gulch. Once a bustling pioneer mining town in the early 1830s, its brief, fervent life was tragically cut short. In the brutal winter of 1832, a catastrophic tunnel collapsed, trapped over 80 miners underground, sealing their fate. The town, consumed by an unimaginable wave of grief, slowly withered. But it wasn't just the economic ruin or the mass burials that marked its end. The mourning survivors began to experience something far more unsettling: their profound sorrow. Their very capacity for grief inexplicably vanished. One by one, families who had wept inconsolably would become eerily tranquil, their faces hollow, their eyes vacant, utterly devoid of emotion. Soon after, they too would disappear, leaving behind their half-eaten meals and rocking chairs still swaying in the cold wind. The official explanation blamed mass hysteria and mass migration driven by desperation. But the few terrified census takers and circuit preachers who dared to venture near spoke of a different, more unsettling truth: not a town consumed by tragedy, but a void where grief went to die, and where a chilling, delicate shimmer began to bloom from the very earth, absorbing everything. Whispering Gulch became a desolate testament to a vanished emotion, its existence eventually fading into obscure county records and chilling, unspoken mountain legends. This story begins with Dr. Alastair Finch, a 42-year-old forensic historian and parapsychologist specializing in residual emotional resonance. Alastair wasn't interested in traditional ghosts. He sought the imprint of extreme human emotion, the quantifiable energetic signature left behind by profound joy, terror, or most particularly sorrow. Whispering Gulch, with its legendary grief-eating phenomenon and the inexplicable emotional void that preceded its abandonment, was his ultimate horrifying case study. He'd pored over fragmented, heavily redacted 19th century county records, hinting at bizarre, localized psychic absorption anomalies detected by crude, early psychological assessment methods, and unverified anecdotes from terrified land surveyors who claimed that on certain moonless nights the gulch would shimmer with an unholy light, draining their very capacity for despair. Alastair believed Whispering Gulch's true horror lay not in the tragedy it suffered, but in the terrible silent consumption that followed. He never intended for his research to empty him. He certainly never intended for the gulch itself to echo his every sorrow. But fragments of his journey, his terrifying descent into the emotional void, survived, captured on his specialized biofeedback suit's internal monitors, meticulously transcribed from his emotion mapping, drones' audio logs, and ultimately retrieved from a meticulously encrypted, partially melted data core, surgically implanted within his abandoned research vehicle, found weeks later, miles from the gulch's desolate perimeter. The first definitive sign that something was irrevocably wrong didn't come from a spectral presence or a sudden chill in the damp, heavy air. It came from the air itself, or rather its utter defiance of emotional resonance. Alastair had navigated the treacherous, overgrown trails and the dense, mist-shrouded hollows for hours, guided by his advanced emotional mapping and the increasingly erratic readings from his psychoenergetic dampening sensors. He finally located Whispering Gulch, a sprawling, dilapidated collection of rotting timber cabins and crumbling mine entrances, its skeletal structures like grim sentinels against the vast, empty sky. The air hung thick, cold, and strangely devoid. of the usual sounds of a healthy mountain environment. No wind rustling the few hardy pines, no distant animal calls, no babbling creek. Just a profound, suffocating stillness. But more unnerving was the profound, unsettling absence of emotional resonance. His sensors, calibrated to detect residual human emotion in historical sites, registered only a vast, cold melody. He spoke into his field recorder, his voice low, professionally detached, though a subtle undertone of profound curiosity tinged with nascent unease was already present. November 10th, 11:15 a.m. Location: Whispering Gulch, Appalachia. Ambient emotional resonance levels dropping precipitously within 50 meters of the main settlement. Registers below typical environmental background. Approach is absolute. Emotional zero. This is anomalous. Extreme psychic absorption. Consistent with folklore. It's like walking into an emotional vacuum. He paused, listening intently to the unsettling quiet that pressed in on his eardrums. It wasn't just quiet. It was an emptiness of human feeling, an unnerving void that seemed to actively consume all sorrow, all despair. He moved deeper into the complex, his reinforced boots crunching unnaturally loud on the scattered rock and decaying timber, the sound immediately swallowed by the oppressive silence. He found the central square, a collection of rotting foundations surrounding a skeletal gallows. But then a faint rhythmic thump, thump, thump resonated from deep beneath the ground, a colossal slow beat, like a monstrous muffled heart. It wasn't the sound of settling ruins or distant machinery. It was too regular, too powerful, too impossibly alive and contained. It seemed to defy the very emotional emptiness it was shrouded in. Hours passed under the oppressive sunless sky, perpetually veiled by the dense, low-hanging mist. The silence grew heavier, more pervasive, now accompanied by a subtle, almost inaudible pressure building behind his eyes. He tried to dismiss it as a psychological effect of extreme sensory deprivation and prolonged emotional paradox. But the sensation persisted, a dull ache that resonated deep within his skull, mirroring the rhythmic thump. His biometric suit registered erratic neural activity, localized spikes in his limbic system, often associated with processing emotion, even though there was no external emotional stimulus to process. His emotion mapping drones, after hours of sweeping the vast silent ruins, finally locked onto a major undeniable anomaly, not just zero ambient emotion, but a consistent rhythmic psionic frequency emanating from deep beneath the gulch's core. Frequency was not geological. It was fluid, organic, like a vast pulsating psychic signal. And from its very core, the thump intensified to a palpable throb, along with a faint, luminous pulse captured by the drone's exotic energy imaging. Not heat, but pure contained emotional energy. A deep, impossible charcoal gray, like the ashes of a burned-out soul, but somehow terrifyingly intrinsically sentient. He whispered into his recorder again, his academic detachment fractured by awe and profound dread. The source, it's deep, beneath the original mine shaft, emitting a non-thermal luminous pulse, a deep organic charcoal gray. The rhythmic beat, it's emanating directly from its core. The pressure, I feel it clearer now. It's like the gulch is listening to my sorrow. The folklore mentioned a silence that ate souls. This is it. This is the source. This is what truly consumes whispering. Gulch. A cold metallic taste filled his mouth, the taste of burgeoning existential dread. Driven by a dangerous, irresistible combination of scientific imperative, fueled by the sheer impossibility of his discovery, and a burgeoning icy fear that chilled him to the core. Alistair located the precise epicenter of the pulsing, charcoal gray anomaly. It was a section of the collapsed mine entrance where massive timbers and rusted pickaxes lay half buried in the damp earth. The air here was utterly still heavy, with a profound earthy scent now tinged with a faint cloying sweetness, like dried tears mixed with something vaguely electrical, like static from extreme despair. The charcoal gray light pulsed from within the very ground, a vast subterranean core, its rhythm a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to synchronize with his own. He noticed peculiar, intricate patterns within the exposed bedrock itself, not just natural. Striations but swirling inclusions that resembled frozen cries or perhaps trapped fragments of suffering. He moved cautiously towards the source, his suit's lights cutting solitary beams through the oppressive gloom. The ground beneath him felt unnervingly soft, despite its solid appearance, almost like walking on vast taut membranes. He could hear his own heartbeat, unnaturally loud, echoing only within his own skull. But then other sensations began to intrude, not from outside, but from within his own mind. Faint, fragmented memories, half-formed thoughts, almost whispers of impossible griefs rising and falling with the charcoal gray pulse. It was profoundly disconcerting, like his own emotional history was being played back to him, distorted and amplified, woven with other alien impressions of profound loss. He reached the center of the anomaly, where the charcoal gray glow was brightest. Here, amidst the wreckage of the mine, something impossible was located. It wasn't just rock. It was a vast organic mass, pulsating softly, half buried beneath the ground. Its surface slick and vaguely membranous, radiating the charcoal gray light. It was massive, stretching out of sight into the unseen depths. It had the distinct rhythm of the thump, thump, thump he'd felt. This was the source of the gulch's endless pulse, a colossal organic collector. And then just beside the pulsating mass, something horrifying came into focus. Not machinery, but a humanoid figure partially submerged within the glowing, shifting organic mass, as if caught mid-absorption. Its face agonizingly clear, despite the faint charcoal gray glow, was contorted in a silent scream, its hands, outstretched fingers splayed. It was a man, likely one of the lost miners from 1832. His features were distinct, his expression raw terror. He was not merely a corpse, he was perfectly horrifyingly preserved, his essence suspended within the living tissue, a testament to an unspeakable fate. Alistair stared horrified. This was beyond anything he had conceived. Not geological, not even acoustic, biological. He activated his bioscanner, pointing it at the organic mass of flesh. The readings were impossible, not inert, not dead. There was persistent bioelectrical activity, faint, erratic, but undeniably present. The mass wasn't just preserving, it was sustaining. Against all logical judgment, compelled by a desperate need to understand, Alistair reached out a gloved hand and gently placed it on the surprisingly warm, yielding surface of the organic mass encasing the man's arm. The moment his glove made contact, a searing jolt, not physical, but purely mental, shot through him. His vision blurred, filled with a blinding flash of charcoal gray light. And then he was plunged into a torrent of raw, unfiltered sensation. Not words, but a rapid-fire sequence of images and emotions, the sudden crushing weight of unbearable grief, the agonizing sensation of his own sorrows being amplified to impossible levels, that abruptly ripped away the horrifying realization that his very essence, his capacity to feel, was being consumed, absorbed by the entity around him. and then a single agonizing voiceless scream echoing in an absolute suffocating void of forgotten sorrows. The vision lasted only a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. Alistair recoiled, tearing his hand away from the living mass. Gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. The internal thump, thump, thump in his head intensified, now accompanied by fainter, more ethereal sobs from within his own mind, like echoes trapped in a chamber. This was not a passive entity. This was a living vault, and it held conscious agony. The mental jolt from touching the organic mass reverberated through Alistair, leaving him gasping, disoriented, his mind reeling from the torrent of borrowed terror. He stumbled backward, his suit's internal systems screaming warnings about neurological overload. The chilling images of the miner's final moments, the crushing despair, the horror of emotional annihilation, the voiceless scream were burned into his retinas, echoing in his thoughts. The profound emotional void of Whispering Gulch seemed to press in harder now, no longer just an absence of feeling, but a conscious, palpable presence. The subtle thump, thump, thump from the ground intensified, transforming into a deep, resonant bass note that vibrated through the very ground beneath his feet, through the soles of his boots up into his bones. It felt like a colossal living drum, beating out a vast, patient, predatory rhythm of emotional undoing. He spoke into his recorder, his voice hoarse-strained. November 10th, 2:45 p.m. Direct contact made with organic anomaly. Experienced immediate intense psychological feedback. Shared subjective experience of emotional negation. The entity, it captures sorrow. It preserves the emptiness. The mass is not inert. It's a living filter absorbing all grief. My brainwave patterns are erratic. My mind, it feels stretched, muted, numb. He paused, listening to the new, deeper bass note. The sobs, it's still there, faint, rhythmic, from within. He forced himself to calm, to analyze. The data streaming from his bioscanner, pointed at the living mass, was impossible. High concentrations of complex biological polymers interwoven with unknown fluid structures, and persistent high-level bioelectrical signatures far beyond typical cellular decay rates. These were not dead organisms. They were suspended alive in some terrifying, agonizing state of emotional nullity. The entity was a living, sentient biological machine capable of absorbing and retaining the essence of life in its final panicked moments of utter despair. As he moved carefully through the derelict mine tunnels, avoiding direct contact with the most intensely pulsating patches of the organic mass, the bass note deepened, becoming a vast resonant symphony. It seemed to emanate from every surface. The air itself began to shimmer, subtly distorting his vision. He started seeing fleeting ethereal images projected directly into his mind's eye, not memories of the miner he touched, but other fragmented emotional experiences. A blurred figure of a woman briefly appearing in her peripheral vision, clutching a child, her frantic wails muffled by the encroaching void, then twisting, stretching, fading into abstract light. A desperate man running his hands across the soil. Above a fresh grave, his profound anguish appearing, then instantly replaced by a hollow serenity. The agonizing surrender of a powerful draft horse, its fear slowly consumed by the living emptiness, its centuries of loyal service compressed into a single, overwhelming pulse of defeat and quietude. The living mass itself seemed to actively draw him in a seductive, irresistible pull emanating from its slick surface. It wasn't a physical suction, but a deep subconscious urge to step into its perfect stillness, to merge, to understand the profound, emptiness the agonizing peace it offered. His gaze kept returning to the horrifying beauty of the pulsating mass, its internal charcoal gray glow, promising ultimate peace, eternal tranquility in emotional oblivion. He felt a profound sense of weariness, an aching desire to simply lie down on its yielding surface, to let the hum wash over him, to become part of its vast living memory of vanished sorrows. His own will felt strangely weak, the boundaries of his self eroding under the constant mental assault. He activated his specialized emotional resonance sensor, aiming it at the surface of the most vibrant patch of the organic mass. The readings were bizarre. The mass itself was generating a subtle internal emotional anomaly, actively bending and absorbing raw human feeling, creating localized pockets of psychic nullity. This anomaly wasn't a byproduct of physics. It was consistent, regulated, almost like the internal process of a vast biological system. This was a living organism, a colossal predatory entity, slowly consuming the very concept of human suffering. And then he saw it. Streaks of deeper, more vibrant charcoal gray within the mass, forming intricate pulsing patterns that shifted and flowed like vast, unseen neurological pathways. This mass was the entity's body, its flesh, its mind. He realized, with a horrifying clarity, that the legends were wrong. The gulch wasn't just cursed. It was feeding, and everything within it. The terrifying realization solidified in Alistair's mind. The living organic mass was not merely a biological anomaly, but a vast predatory entity, slowly consuming and assimilating the very fabric of human emotion, transforming raw suffering into its own monstrous unified form. The constant low bass note vibrated through the air, growing more insistent, drawing him closer to the heart of the mine. The mental echoes were no longer random fragments. They became more focused, more personal whispers, not of the victims, but seemingly directed at him. You seek understanding. We provide. Be absorbed. Be empty. The words were formless, yet undeniably present in his thoughts, a seductive, invasive presence. He stumbled forward, driven by a desperate need to find evidence to prove this impossible horror. He saw it then, the active emotional absorption site. A section of a mine cart ahead seemed to ripple its rusted metal, subtly dissolving, then reappearing, defying physical stability. A miner's lamp hanging from a timber briefly appeared to glow with a brilliant, vibrant light, then snapped back to its dull, corroded state, its light utterly consumed. Objects like scattered tools or debris would momentarily flicker out of existence and reappear a foot to the left, as if their emotional significance was stuttering. It was happening in real time. The process was slow, agonizingly so, but inexorable. His solid perception of reality slowly warped, becoming part of the living, pulsating organism. Further ahead, closer to the largest section of the organic mass, he saw something even more disturbing. A large wild bear, its form shimmering half-submerged in the glowing, shifting organic mass. Its powerful hind legs still free, but its front paws, torso, and head already solidified into translucent charcoal gray. Flesh, its eyes wide with unspeakable agony, reflected the terrifying beauty of the mass's glow. The bass note resonated from it, and Alistair felt a surge of raw, animalistic terror, a desperate, futile struggle erupting in his mind as he inadvertently brushed his gloved hand against a low-lying section of the living mass. The bear was not dead. It was trapped alive in its silent flesh tomb, experiencing eternal, disorienting agony. It's ongoing, he gasped into his recorder, his voice a raw whisper. The assimilation, It's not a past event. It's happening now. It's absorbing living organisms, and they're aware. They're conscious within the flesh. Their emotions are gone. He could feel a faint, almost imperceptible cold radiating from the very air. Around him, a subtle decrease in the ambient temperature. That his suit registered consistent with a vast biological process consuming energy. The sweet, cloying scent was stronger, almost suffocating. As he watched the horrifying transformation of the mine cart, a fine, almost invisible vapor began to rise from the surface of the living mass, shimmering with faint charcoal gray motes. It was not mist, it was a diffusion of the entity's essence, a fine, almost gaseous form of the living tissue itself. It swirled around his suit, clinging to the visor, making his vision subtly blurry. He felt an unsettling, tingling sensation on his exposed skin around the cuffs of his gloves and the unprotected areas of his neck. It was a subtle stickiness, a faint tackiness, like dried, invisible residue. He tried to wipe it away, but it seemed to cling stubbornly. Then, from the largest section of the living mass, the ground itself seemed to undulate. A wave rippled outwards from its colossal bulk, not of rock, but of pulsating charcoal gray flesh, smoothly extending, seeking. And then from the surface of the mass, several translucent flexible tendrils, gleaming with internal charcoal gray light, slowly emerged. They were too perfectly formed to be natural roots or muscle. They were too purposeful in their movement. They moved slowly, sinuously, like probing fingers extending towards the flickering objects, towards the absorbing bear, and terrifyingly towards him. The entity is not just consuming passively, it is reaching. The mental intrusions intensified now, accompanied by fragmented, distorted voices, not from the air, but from within his mind. Terrified, pleading whispers joining the entity's pervasive bass note. Join the quiet forever. He felt his own legs heavy, his movements sluggish, as if the very essence of the entity was beginning to seep into his joints, slowing his reactions. The terrifying realization solidified the entity wasn't just physical. It was a vast, conscious despair eater, a trap laid for centuries, and he had stumbled into its very core. The translucent charcoal gray tendrils, gleaming with internal light, extended from the vast organic mass, inching across the damp ground towards Alistair. Their movement was slow, deliberate, utterly silent, yet filled with an insidious, unyielding purpose. The mental intrusions roared in his mind, a chorus of fragmented pleas, and the entity's vast, unfeeling command. Feel, suffer, be assimilated. He could feel a subtle, unsettling cold radiating from the tendrils, a cold that promised not comfort, but absorption into oblivion. His own will felt fragile, battered by the constant psychic assault. He stumbled backward, desperately trying to evade the slow, methodical reach of the tendrils. His suit's internal systems screaming warnings about high-frequency emotional absorption. The air around him was now thick with the fine, shimmering charcoal gray vapor clinging to his suit, his skin permeating his every breath. The sweet, cloying scent was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. He risked a glance down at his gloved hand. A faint, almost imperceptible numbness was beginning to form on the surface of his glove, a subtle, chilling sensation that looked disturbingly similar to the initial stages of emotional consumption he had observed. He frantically tried to rub it off, but it clung, subtly hardening. It was already spreading. The entity was not just reaching for him, it was actively consuming him molecule by molecule, his very capacity for feeling becoming the preliminary layer of its terrible emotion-devouring flesh. "It's on me," he gasped into. His recorder, his voice raw with a terror that transcended scientific curiosity. The charcoal gray vapor, it's infesting. I'm numbing. My mind, it feels empty. He tried to scream louder, but only a silent, choked gasp emerged, his fear itself being siphoned away. The massive organic mass from which the tendrils emanated began to pulse with a renewed, brighter charcoal gray light. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump intensified, rising in pitch, becoming a low, echoing thrum like a vast, empty chamber filling his head. The mental intrusions were no longer whispers, but loud, horrifying echoes of agonizing screams thousands have trapped. Minds crying out in an unspeakable chorus of terror and eternal consciousness. This was the raw, unfiltered lament of Whispering Gulch, composed of the final moments of all it had consumed, eternally cycling in a loop of silent despair. Alistair knew he couldn't fight it physically. The tendrils were slowly but surely gaining on him, their fleshy tips almost touching his boots. The realization that he was facing a vast sentient predatory consciousness, one that consumed life and processed despair, hammered into his mind with brutal clarity. He was just another echo for its endless void, another sorrow consumed by its terrifying living emptiness. His eyes darted around the crumbling mind, desperate. His gaze fell upon his autonomous drone, lying discarded near the edge of the cellar, having crashed earlier due to the intense energy interference. Its outer shell was already partially coated in the thin charcoal gray vapor, but its internal recording systems, designed to be hardened against extreme environments, might still be functional. If he could reach it, if he could transfer his final horrifying data, his last observations before he became completely assimilated. It was a desperate, illogical hope. He lunged towards the drone, forcing his stiffening limbs to move. The charcoal gray tendrils, sensing his movement, accelerated their fleshy tips, striking the ground just inches behind his feet. The echoing hum of the gulch intensified to a piercing whine, causing agonizing pain in his skull. The mental screams of the trapped souls became a deafening chorus, drowning out his own thoughts, pulling him towards the edge of madness. He reached the drone, his stiff fingers fumbling with the data port. The numbness on his gloved hand was visibly thicker now, his movements becoming slow, deliberate, almost petrified. He slammed his suit's data cable into the drone's port, initiating an emergency upload. The drone's small indicator light flickered green, then blue, then with a final desperate surge, glowing a steady charcoal gray, mirroring the light that consumed the gulch. Data was transferring, his knowledge, his warnings. But the tendrils were upon him. They wrapped around his legs, his arms subtle at first, then firm, pulling him gently, inexorably, towards the vast organic mass of the emotion-devouring gulch. He could feel the charcoal gray film spreading rapidly across his entire suit over his faceplate, slowly obscuring his vision, turning the world into a single blinding, shifting haze of impossible emptiness. The pervasive echoing hum became a part of him, vibrating through every cell. The mental screams of the trapped souls were no longer external. They were his screams merging with the chorus. His final thought, as the charcoal gray flesh fully encased his faceplate, his eyes wide and staring his body, frozen mid-struggle, was not of fear, but horrifying, agonizing clarity. He was Whispering Gulch now, and he remembered every sorrow. And he was empty. And deep within Whispering Gulch, the air grew stiller still, for the silence that remained had consumed another heart, leaving behind only the cold, unending echo of absolute emptiness.